Welcome to Saudi Nation. This is Vinny P. And today we're going to talk about H.R. 334 with the 115th Congress. This bill was proposed January 5th of 2017 by Miss Lee, Mr. Nadler, Mr. Grijalva, Mr. Hastings, Mr. Ellison, Mr. Conyers, and Mr. Serrano. They introduced which this bill has been referred to the Committee of Veterans Affairs in addition to the Committees of Energy and Commerce and Foreign Affairs for a period to be subsequently determined by the Speaker, in each case for consideration of such provisions as fall within the jurisdiction of the committee concerned. Alright, so this is a bill to direct the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and the Secretary of Veteran Affairs to provide assistance for individuals affected by exposure to Agent Orange, and for other purposes, as always. Section 1, short title, this act may be cited as the Victims of Agent Orange Relief Act of 2017. Section 2, finding and purpose. A. Finding. Congress makes the following findings. 1. From 1961 to 1971, approximately 19 million gallons of 15 different herbicides were sprayed over the southern region of Vietnam. The agents include 13 million gallons of Agent Orange, 4.5 gallons of Agent White, 1 million gallons of Agent Blue, and 420,000 gallons of Agent Purple, and relatively smaller quantities of other herbicides. Many of the herbicides, including Agents Orange, Purple, Green, Pink, Dinoxyl, and Trinoxyl, contained the toxic contaminant dioxin, TCDD. Agent Blue contained high levels of arsenic. The aforementioned 15 herbicides, including the contaminant dioxin, are usually collectively referred to as Agent Orange. Between 1968 and 1971, a total of 6,500 spraying missions were carried out in an area about 1.5 million hectares, which represented about 10% of South Vietnam. 3. Studies show that between 2.1 million and 4.8 million Vietnamese and tens of thousands of Americans were exposed to Agent Orange during the spring. Many other Vietnamese were or continue to be exposed to Agent Orange through contact with the environment and food that was contaminated, or as offspring of those exposed who now suffer from illness and disabilities. Alright. Let's see, section 4. Today there are still dozens of environmental hotspots that continue to contaminate the food, soil, sediment, livestock, and wildlife with Agent Orange. In fact, concentrations of TCDD as high as 1,000 milligrams or kilograms if you're in that weird unit, if you use weird units, were found in soil and sediment examples more than 30 years after Agent Orange was sprayed in Vietnam. Agent Orange exposure continues to negatively affect the lives of veterans of the United States Armed Forces, Vietnamese people, and Vietnamese Americans, and their children. The lives of many victims are cut short, and others live with disease, disabilities, and pain, often untreated or unrecognized. The Department of Veteran Affairs recognizes certain illnesses and diseases, and I'm not going to get into all of them due to the fact that I can't pronounce most of it. But they do cover like respiratory cancers and soft tissues, sarcomas, as associated with spraying and use of Agent Orange by the United States Armed Forces during the Vietnam era. No similar consideration has been given to affected Vietnamese or Vietnamese Americans. The Department of Veteran Affairs provides compensation for many severe birth defects among children of American women veterans who served in Vietnam. The list of birth defects covered in, well, that's a whole nother list of things I can't even pronounce. But affected children of these women veterans receive medical care and other benefits through the VA. The only birth defect recognized for children of male American veterans is spina bifida, but not occulta, resulting in most affected children receiving no benefits. No assistance has been given to the children of male or female Vietnamese or Vietnamese Americans connected with their exposure to their parents' or grandparents' exposure. The Institute of Medicine for the past several years has noted that it is considerably more plausible than previously believed that exposure to the herbicides sprayed in Vietnam may have caused paternally mediated transgenerational effects. And I didn't say transgender. Attributable to the TCCD contaminant in Agent Orange, in recent years, scientific studies have identified likely epigenetic links between exposure to toxins and birth defects and developmental disorders in subsequent generations. Some of the children and grandchildren of exposed persons, American Vietnamese and Vietnamese Americans, who were in southern Vietnam during the Vietnam era, likely suffer from disorders, birth defects, and illnesses related to Agent Orange. Dating back to 2007, the United States has engaged in environmental remediation of contamination at the Da Nang and Bang Ho airports and provided funds for public health and disabilities activities for individuals residing in some of the affected areas. April 30th of 2017 is the 42nd anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. All right, so it is the purpose of this act to address and remediate the ongoing problems and concerns that arose or will arise from the use of Agent Orange during the Vietnam era. All right, so Section 3, assistance for individuals affected by health issues related to exposure to Agent Orange. A, for covered individuals, the Secretary of State shall provide assistance to address the health care needs of covered individuals. Such assistance shall include the provisions of medical and chronic care services, nursing services, vocational employment training, and medical equipment. B, for caregivers, the Secretary of State shall provide assistance to institutions in Vietnam that provide health care for covered individuals. Such assistance shall include medicines, medical equipment, custodial care, home care, respite care, and day care programs, training programs for caregivers, medical, physical rehabilitation, and counseling service, and equipment for illnesses and deformities associated with exposure to Agent Orange, and reconstructive surgical programs. Subsection C. For housing and poverty reduction, the Secretary of State shall provide the assistance to repair and rebuild substandard homes in Vietnam for covered individuals and the families of covered individuals. The Secretary of State shall provide micro-grants to loans to facilitate subsistence payments and poverty reductions for covered individuals and families of covered individuals. For environmental remediation, in general, the Secretary of State shall provide assistance to remediate those geographic areas of Vietnam that the Secretary determines high levels of Agent Orange. Priority. In providing assistance under this subsection, the Secretary of State shall give priority to heavily sprayed areas, particularly areas that served as military bases where Agent Orange was handled, and areas where heavy spraying and air crashes resulted in harmful deposits of Agent Orange. Administrative authorities. The Secretary of State shall 1. Provide assistance under this section, other than assistance under subsection D, through appropriate Vietnamese community and non-governmental organizations, and, where necessary, public agencies. Provide assistance under this section to affected persons in all areas of Vietnam, including rural, mountainous, and urban areas. Encourage strategic alliances between private and public sector partners as a business model for achieving the goals of this section, and seek out and actively encourage other bilateral donors as well as United States and foreign business enterprises in Vietnam to support the goals of this section through development assistance and corporate philanthropy programs. F. Covered individual defined. In this section, the term covered individual means an individual who, 1, is a resident of Vietnam, and 2, subsection A, is affected by health issues related to the exposure of Agent Orange, which took place during the period beginning on January 1st of 1961 and ending on May 7th, 1975, or whose lives or has lived in or near geographic areas in Vietnam that continue to contain high levels of Agent Orange as described in subsection D, or is a child or descendant of individual described in subparagraph A and is affected by health issues described in subparagraph A. 4. Public research. The Secretary of State and the Secretary of Veterans Affairs shall identify and provide assistance to support research relating to health issues of individuals affected by Agent Orange. Such research should include recommended focus provided by the United States Institute of Medicine and as identified in their biennial Veterans and Agent Orange update, and support by the active involvement of schools of public health and medicine located in the United States, Vietnam, and other interested countries. Section 5. Department of Health and Human Services Health Assessment and Assistance for Vietnamese Americans. A. Health Assessment. The Secretary of Health and Human Services shall make grants to appropriate public health organizations and Vietnamese American organizations for the purpose of conducting a broad health assessment of Vietnamese Americans who may have been exposed to Agent Orange and their children or descendants to determine the effects to their health of such exposure. B. Assistance. The Secretary of Health and Human Services shall establish centers in locations in the United States where large populations of Vietnamese Americans reside for the purpose of providing assessment, counseling, and treatment for conditions related to exposure of Agent Orange. The Secretary may carry out this subsection through appropriate community and non-governmental organizations or other suitable organizations as determined by the Secretary. Section 6. Provisions of benefits for children and male veterans who served in Vietnam who were affected by certain birth defects. In general, Subchapter 2 of Chapter 18 of Title 38 United States Code is amended 1. By striking women Vietnam veteran each place it appears and inserting Vietnam veteran. 2. By striking women Vietnam veterans each place it appears and inserting Vietnam veterans. And 3. In the heading of such subchapter by striking women. Access to records for research purposes. Section 1813B of such title is amended by striking the Secretary and inserting 1. The Secretary, and 2. by adding at the end, quote unquote, the end of the following new paragraph. 2. The Secretary shall require any health care provider with whom the Secretary enters into a contract under this subsection to provide access to the medical records of individuals who receive health care under this section and section to the Department of Veteran Affairs for the purpose of conducting research or providing support for research into the intergenerational effects of Agent Orange exposure. C. Clerical amendment. The table of sections at the beginning of such chapter is amended by striking the item relating to subchapter 2 and inserting the following new item. Subchapter 2. Children of Vietnam veterans born with certain birth defects. D. Effective date. The amendments made by this section shall take effect on the date that is 30 days after the date of enactment of this act. Section 7, deadline for implementation. No later than 180 days after the date of this enactment of this Act, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and the Secretary of Veteran Affairs shall each complete a plan for implementation of the provisions of this Act and the amendment made by this Act applicable to such Secretary, and shall issue a request for proposals. If applicable, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and the Secretary of Veterans Affairs shall each implement the provisions of this Act applicable to such Secretary by not later than 18 months after the date of the enactment of this Act. Section 8, quarterly reports. No later than 30 days after the last day of each fiscal quarter, beginning on or after 18 months after the date of the enactment of this Act, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and the Secretary of Veteran Affairs shall each submit to Congress a report on the implementation of the provisions of this Act applicable to such Secretary during the immediately preceding fiscal quarter. Section 9, definition. For purposes of this Act, the term Agent Orange includes any chemical compound which became part, either by design or through impurities, of an herbicide agent used in support of the United States and Allied military operations in the Republic of Vietnam. Now, my personal opinion is, yeah, we should help, but not to the extent of this bill. Our taxpayer dollars get wasted enough. Our VA system sucks. We have Vietnam vets, Persian Gulf vets, now vets that are coming out of the service now, and they can't get fucking help. But then they want to send money over to Vietnam and help these people. Let's get our shit together first and help our vets. They are number one. Vietnam War was a terrible war. Agent Orange is a fucked up weapon. But let's get our vets that have been affected by Agent Orange, let's get them the help they need first, and not some Vietnamese that is worlds away. I have no problem doing, putting money in for research. I have no problem helping out Vietnamese Americans that served with the U.S. military, that are U.S. veterans. I have no problem with that. But let's not send our money to another country. We can work together, but our taxpayer dollars have to go where it's really important. And sorry, I hate to say it, everybody's life's important, but Vietnam can deal with their own. We deal with ours. Anyways, that is the end of that. Let me know what you think. This is a touchy subject for some. But let me know. And if you like it, hit like. If you want to subscribe, man. And until next time, this is Vinny P. Peace.